All right, folks, let's go ahead and do this. Just like usual, make sure you've forked the M0C7 from Static Void Academy over to your own account, and then after you've done that, go ahead and clone the repository. And then when you're done cloning it, go ahead and cd into the repository. Now, inside this repository, you've got a few different files here. You've got the Readme with the prompt and a pip file, etc. So the first thing we need to do is we need to run pipenv install to make sure that we have everything we need, and then we can do pipenv shell. Okay, cool. So it says we're inside M0C7 now, so we're inside the virtual environment with all of the stuff that we need installed. So on these kinds of problems, whenever I'm looking at a code base that someone else wrote that already exists, etc., first thing I'm always going to do is make sure to check the README, okay? So the README, obviously, in this case, is going to have information for the prompt and whatnot, so we've already gone through most of this. There's not going to really be anything additional here that we need to know about the code. We kind of just need to dive in. Most of the time, whenever you're working on other people's code bases, the README is going to contain information about how to, contribute, how to install, get things up and running, etc. It's not going to be the case here. So let's see here. I guess the next thing that we can do is probably go ahead and execute some of these tests here. So when I execute these tests, you can see that there's a bunch of failures. And so if I scroll back up here, you can see that record added, record edited. Well, okay, that seems like a really easy fix right there. It's just an assertion error. We can see that one value does not equal the other, and that just looks like a typo. This looks like a capitalization mistake. I have no idea what Hubba Bubba is. Okay, yeah, those seem like easy fixes. Let's go ahead and do those real quick. So I'm going to open up another terminal on the side here. Sorry, this is going to be Vim Python employee database. So inside our code here, you can see we've got a bunch of stuff and we've got a bunch of functions. It looks like there's a usage statement at the top. I'm guessing usage means how to use the program. And so I guess if you really quickly execute directly the program, you first get the usage statement and then you're immediately given the command line option. So we can play around with that in just a little bit. Let's just really quickly browse through the code. We have names and cities as dictionaries, and so they're empty dictionaries to start. Okay. We have a function which is add employee record, and so it looks like what happens is that if the ID already exists, or if the name or city are empty, return false. Name and city, it looks like we pass that in here, and the documentation says that the name and city cannot be empty. So if we try to add an empty name or empty city to the employee record, that returns false. If we are trying to modify an ID that already exists, that returns false. So this is specifically adding brand new records only for IDs that do not exist. Okay? And then if we keep scrolling down here, otherwise create the dictionary pairs. So we saw earlier that we have like the two dictionaries, we have like the names and cities, right? So it looks like what happens is that we have corresponding pairs of items in each dictionary. And so we have an ID key that maps to a name in the names dictionary, but then we have an ID key. The same ID key maps to a wait. Is that right? Huh. There should be city, shouldn't it? Yeah, I don't know. I'll fix that later. I have no idea what that is. Okay, so as we browse through, we're just going to make a note here and just see that, that might be something interesting to keep an eye on. So if I put that there, now if I go down and I see edit employee record, okay, so this is for editing an employee. If not ID in names or not ID in num in cities, then we return false. So the ID has to exist in these dictionaries. In this case, then we set the city. See, this looks wrong again. We should be setting the name and the city, correct? So all right, that's going to be another thing to take a look at here. I'm just going to add a to-do. if we go through the code here, we can see here, get an employee's detail. So get employee record, this is where Hubba Bubba is. So we can just go ahead and return, like fix this right now. It looked like earlier Hubba Bubba was supposed to, shoot, I don't remember. Let's just execute the tests again. And so when we execute the tests, we should be returning error viewing record instead of Hubba Bubba. So that can be fixed immediately. All right, that fixes that. Remove employee record, deletes an employee's record if it exists. Okay, Del City again. Okay, see, that doesn't make sense. All right. And so now we get to the actual main command. There's a couple typos in here that we can easily fix right now. So it looks like there's an added id somewhere. If I search for added id, oh, there it is. Okay, fixes that. Invalid ID and ID, that's just a capitalization error. So if I look for invalid ID, then we get this right here. So we can just uppercase that real quick, and that should fix those. So we fixed a couple things right there. Let's see how many tests passed now. Okay, cool, awesome. So now it looks like 9 tests ran and 3 of them fail now. So now we're getting some interesting results, right? The first thing is that we're getting 1 Jacob Denver, or we're getting 1 Michael when we expected 1 Jacob Denver. Okay, well, so whenever you run tests and they fail, the good thing to do is going to be to check exactly what the test is, right? So if I go into test employee database and I take a look at adds then edits a user's name, so if I do a quick search for that, adds then edits, you should get to test edit valid, right? So it looks like, so if you don't know how to read this format, the first thing you should notice is that we have a tests variable which contains a whole bunch of stuff in here, and then we do an assert interactions. And so if we don't know what assert interactions does, we can go ahead and search for it inside the code, and then you should eventually find a define assert interactions here, which is a function. And so in the documentation we see this is a helper function to send input and compare output to given expected. Lists of 2-value tuples in the format input and expected output. Okay, so this is basically what the test is putting into the program, and then this is the output that it expects for that input. So if I go back down to test, let me see here, test edit valid, right? So it looks like what we're doing here is we're doing add 1, we're getting name, and then we're putting in Michael, and then we're getting city, we're putting in Denver, and then we should get record added. And then when we see edit 1, we do all this stuff. Let's go ahead and just execute our program here and try to do the same thing manually. If I do add 1, right, I should get name, that's correct. If I say Michael, I get city. If I say Denver, I get record added. Very good. Now I'm going to do edit 1, right? And then I get name. I'm going to put in Jacob. Then I'm going to get \r. Here in the notes, you can see here that \r is just a return. So in other words, empty input. Okay, so I'm just going to hit enter there. And so now if I do view 1, I get 1 Michael. Okay, gotcha. So it looks like when I put this stuff in, I put in Jacob, and I expected the name to change from Michael to Jacob, and then I expected the location to remain the same. So that means that whenever we input anything empty on an edit, then it shouldn't change the value that was there before. Okay, that gives us an idea of how the behavior should be. And now let's go back to the code and take a look at what it's actually doing, right? If we go down here to the edit employee record, you can see here, so earlier when we were going through the code, remember how I marked this as suspicious, right? Here you go, there's the problem. So the first thing that's a problem is that we're not setting the name at all. So if we do names ID num is going to be equal to name, then that is going to now overwrite this name, right? So if I, whoops, that's not what I meant to do. Here it is. Sorry. All right, so we have made this fix right here, and we have written the changes, and so now I'm going to exit out of this program again. Now I'm going to do the same thing again. Add 1, Michael, Denver, record added, edit 1. Now I'm going to do Jacob, empty again, record edited. And now if I view it, I see one Jacob, but we're still overwriting the city, right? We expect the behavior to be that if any input is empty, then we just leave it alone. So it should say one Jacob Denver. So now how do we account for this, right? Well, if you take a look here, what we're doing is we're just directly setting it to the names and the variables. However, if they're empty, now we need to check, right? So, there are multiple ways to do this. Now, if you wanted to, you could do if, name is not equal to empty string, something like that. But there's actually an easier way to do this, which is if name, and that's it, right? This is a concept called truthiness in a lot of programming languages, where you don't actually have to put a direct Boolean inside the if-else statement. You can just put in like objects or variables, and if they exist, if they're not zero, if they're not empty, there's a whole bunch of different things. You'll have to kind of experiment with it and learn yourself. Then it will automatically count as true. And so in this case, if name is not an empty string, then that will register as true, and then we can overwrite it. Same thing here. We're going to do the same thing again. If city, then we can overwrite city. Now if we write this change right there, and then we run through the same stuff again, add 1, Michael, Denver, edit 1, Jacob, nothing, and then we view 1, we get 1 Jacob Mike. What the fuck? 1 Jacob Michael. That is wrong. What just happened? Oh no. View get employee record. Okay, so it looks like we're just returning whatever's in there, right? So wow, I see. Here you go. So it looks like what happened here is 1 Jacob Michael. Yep. Okay, so earlier when we were going through the code together, remember how I marked this as a to-do as well. You see here how we set the city equal to a name? That should be equal to city right there, right? So that means that, when you see this kind of stuff, if you didn't know that, what you could have done is you could have done just add 1 Michael Denver, and then you could have just viewed the record immediately after that, and then you can see that it was correct. Wait a minute, hold on. What's going on here? Oh, that's because I wrote the changes already. Whoops. Sorry. So if I had not written the changes yet, right? If I wrote this and then reran this code again, if I did add 1 Michael Denver and then I viewed the record, you can see here that it says 1 Michael. So there you go. That's a problem right there, right? So this is supposed to be city. All right, so we've actually made several changes already. Let's run the tests again and see how many of them pass. And we get 1 more failure. This one says record removed and then error removing record. We're getting error removing record? Okay, so let's see here. So what's happening is that if we decide to remove something, we're supposed to print record deleted if remove employee record, otherwise error removing record. Wait a minute. If remove employee record. Okay. So this is another interesting thing to teach you here. So if I expand this screen real quick, you should have seen a hint here. It says look up Python ternary. So Python, you can write if-else statements in one line like this. And so what's basically happening here is that if remove employee record ID num is true, right? You've seen if-else statements before. If this is true, then we end up printing this line. Otherwise, if it's false, then we end up printing this instead. And so that's what's happening to our code right now, is that for some reason remove employee record is returning false. So we should go and take a look at that. Remove employee record. And now if we take a look at here, yep, here you go. You can see here that I have marked another to do, right? You can see here that if ID num in nums, then idel city, but if ID num in cities, yeah, that's what's happening. So you can see here that this is obviously wrong. I want to delete the ID or the key from the names dictionary, right? However, what's happening here is that I'm deleting it from cities, and then immediately after that, I'm checking to see if this key exists in cities. Since I already deleted it up here, this is obviously going to return false, and that's why we return error adding record. Okay, so I'm going to get rid of this right here and then fix this back to names. And now, if I run the tests, it's still failing! Ah! Oh, okay, this doesn't look too bad. All right, so now we have record removed and record deleted. Okay, so that just sounds like a mismatch in terms. So we expected to say record removed, but instead we're saying deleted. So if I go to search where deleted is, I'm gonna go and change that to removed. Now I'm gonna execute the test again. And yeah, all right, we fixed everything, cool. So hopefully my thought process for going through and fixing this code made somewhat sense to you, right? First thing you should do whenever you're working on someone else's code base is you should always try to go through and take a look and see what's going on. Now, if you're looking at a really, really massive code base, then this might not be the most productive use of your time, right? If you're looking at millions of lines of code, it does not make sense for you to go and do a walkthrough of all million lines of code. That doesn't make sense. In that case, what you would do is what I just did, which is to execute the tests and then see where it's failing, and then go take a look at the test, check what the tests are looking for, and then you can go in and modify and play around with the program, look at the code, etc. We'll see more examples of this throughout this course, and we'll have to modify the format slightly too, because different programs are going to require different methods of debugging, essentially. So yeah, that was Module 0, Challenge 7. It took a slightly different format, and it was meant to challenge you in a different way, right? Because up until now, we've just been kind of writing code and doing everything ourselves from scratch, which is a lot easier than going in, looking at a piece of code, understanding it, and then making changes to it. And that is a far more common scenario that you encounter when you start working in the industry. As a new engineer, you typically don't get to start writing your new features or new programs or services from scratch. You have to go in and fix some bugs and learn about the currently existing system. And going in and fixing bugs is usually one of the fastest ways to learn the code base and learn how the system works. So yeah, this was just your first taste of that. This was meant to be practice. If you didn't totally get this, that's okay. Just rewatch this video, kind of go through, notice in key points where I am trying to reason my way through it, right? Like, hey, this message is causing this thing, and this is supposed to be a false. It looks like this is a function, so I should go to that function definition. What's going on here? That looks like a problem, etc. It's all about problem solving and kind of working your way through the code. Anyways, this video is starting to get a little bit long now, so I will let you go. And in the next video, I will be going over, what is the next video? I don't even remember. I can't remember if the next video is a lesson or if there's another challenge, but whatever the next video is, good luck. I will see you in the next video. Actually, I forgot to do this earlier, so I'm going to go ahead and do it now. Git status. Remember the typical thing, git add, git commit, git push. Remember to keep up with your version control stuff.